I'm here to talk about racist hate crime, and the brief I was given was to talk about impact and to a point talk a little bit about harms, and I've noticed you've been having those conversations, and then talk a little bit about what makes a difference, in a sense, for people, and I hope I can do some justice for you this afternoon on that. I wanted to start first, though, with reading something that I did in Waltham Forest a few years ago. It's called Building Bridges, and we did a piece of work where we worked with the local Muslim community and local, what we crudely call white working class community, and just focusing on what some of the things were just said here. This is what a particular white woman said. She said, I love it, I love it. My house comes in and it's like the united colours of Benetton. There's Asians, there's blacks, Asians, mixed race, white, Irish, everything, gingers, everything. Very hopeful. And what was really interesting in that research was how positive a lot of people were about the borough. So it was really nice to be invited to this and to sort of make some connections with that. But there were also negatives as well, and there's bound to be. There's one other thing I want to say, because I know I've only got 10 minutes. Waltham Forest in 1991 did one of the best pieces of research that was probably ever done in that period around what we used to call racial harassment, which we now crudely call hate crime. It's called Beneath the Surface. If you can dig it out, find it. It's still one of the best pieces of work ever done. And as a consequence of that, Waltham Forest set up the Waltham Forest Racial Harassment Project, which equally was excellent. I was shortlisted twice to work. The second time I didn't go to the interview because I'd fallen in love with somebody in Lancaster, and that's where I continue to live. Anyway, have a look at the histories is what I'm saying. There's no year zero. There's a lot of things that are being done that you can learn from. So my life with all of this started way back in 1981 as a child, when I came across this piece of work, where it actually began to first really start talking about what we mean by racial harassment, what we now call hate crime. In there was the first time that, as officially, we started as a country, if you like, but certainly as a government, to start talking about racial attacks, what we now call hate crime. We moved to Stephen Lawrence, and I'm sure you would have done some of this work before, in 1993, the murder of Stephen Lawrence, which actually, has a context because there was a number of racist murders, both here in London, Manchester, and others, that led to then the Macpherson report, that then led to a sort of a new agenda. And part of that was looking at the sort of the failings of the police. And it's interesting you've mentioned the police over and over again here. But a lot of work has been done, because I don't think we'd be sitting here from that premise if a lot of work hadn't been done. And the definitions and the work that was then done to start dealing with what we call racist incidents, now call hate incidents or hate crime, has actually been really, really powerful in some senses. What then becomes sad is when we start to hear our people in this room saying there are still these problems. There's still repeat victimisation. There's still secondary victimisation. Namely, if I go and make a complaint, I'm not getting the service that I think I should be getting from whatever organisation is the police. I'm not necessarily going to go through this again because you would have discussed it, and then I'm going to bore you very quickly with this. And I know I was told not to use tables. Don't worry about the table, just focus here. 44,087. It very clearly there says this is this year, well, 2018 to 2019, hate crime in England and Wales. It says public order offences, 44,000 or so. So the vast majority of what we call race incidents fall into this category of public order offences. This will make sense. The total number was 107,000 or so. It's a big, big number of incidents across all these characteristics. But 44,000, and you'll see it all runs along here to 58,000, over half of what we call hate incidents recorded by the police are public order offences. What does that mean? It means this. They usually refer to the use of or threat of violence or harassment towards someone else in a public place. They usually involve more than one person and someone else to have been threatened or have felt fear. Basic definition of harassment, in a sense. What does all that mean? It means this when we get to hate crime or racist hate crime. Let me just get this open. Within all of that, verbal abuse and harassment are the most common experiences. The name calling, if you like, amongst other things. They're often described as things that happen all the time, every day. Yeah? It's no different. Same story over 20, 30 years. And they are the least likely to be reported. So if you track the evidence, 44,000, big number, they are the least likely to be reported. So you already have the beginnings from evidence to start creating an intervention. If they are the least likely to be reported, what harm do they have? We'll have a look in a minute. But compared also then to all crime, and you would have talked about the Crime Survey England and Wales, I think, found that hate crime is more likely to involve violence and criminal damage. So there's a paradox that you've got to deal with. Verbal abuse most common, but hate crime is more likely to involve violence and criminal damage. That's likely to get reported. But what does that mean? So what I did for you, I just sort of had a look. I looked at, when you're a researcher, you've always got to look at your own stuff as well and tell people about it. But I gave you sort of a 1999 to 2014, looked at some of the comprehensive research that was done. I happen to be one over there, and this is Neil Chakrabarty on this end. And when we talk about impact, we're talking about all sorts of things that you've actually covered in the slides as I was looking further back. Family and home relationships. The number one thing that I found when I've been doing intensive interviews with victims is around the impact on family and home relationships. Something that is external, is happening externally, is impacting internally in my home. The impact on children can be as simple as things like they're not allowed to go out, for example, because mom and dad might be afraid. But the point is there's a range of basic impacts. I change my behaviour. People stop coming to my house less. People change the way they dialogue with me. I begin to have feelings of insecurity about where I live. I begin to have impacts on health and well-being. Okay. My quality of life is affected. I begin to think about where should I move to because I don't want to stay here. I think about installing or improving or increasing security. In other words, I'm constantly making behavioural changes. They're the basic impacts that happen. Now, if we've said that they impact, hate crime is impacted more on people than non-hate crimes, what does that look like as a harm? And excuse the amount of language that's there. But the Crime Survey of England and Wales gives you some pointers that you can use. Victims of hate crime are more likely to feel emotionally affected by the incident, big numbers, and to say that they were very much affected by the incident compared to non-hate crime victims. Victims of hate crime twice as likely to suffer a loss of confidence or increased feelings of vulnerability after the incident compared with non-hate crime victims, and twice as likely to experience fear, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, depression, anxiety than non-hate crime victims, and similarly more likely to suffer repeat victimization, which is defined as something that you have suffered an incident at least once in that period, so it would be twice, if you like, or more. I'm going to run out of time by the looks of it, but in terms of the next stage, I was thinking that one of the clues you have is the government policy. And the government policy talks in terms of how we make a difference through policy, and it offers these 5 pointers, which obviously I'm about to run out of time to discuss, but certainly about some of the things you're already talking about. The thing I focus most on is here, how do we improve support? If our formal agencies are failing people, how do we as communities respond? Yeah, okay. So I'll leave it at that. I wasn't going to go through all of that. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.